Thank you very much, Rim, and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great pleasure to be here to address what is, for me, for purely selfish reasons, a very important issue, but I think also a very important issue for the future of the European financial system. Our proposal has been out for now almost a year. It was published on the 29th of January. So I do not propose to bore you by taking you through the details of the proposal. I assume that everybody who has made the effort to come here has also made the effort to read it and to be familiar with it. Also, I think it would be very tedious if I took you through all the details. So basically, I just want to focus on 4 points that I'd like to highlight related to this proposal. The 4 points, if I get them in the right order, are one is something that has already been alluded to by Rim, which is the bigger question is the rationale for the proposal, but also the link with other reforms that have already been adopted, and therefore the question about the added value of this proposal. The second point I'd like to address is the possible impact or the consequences of this proposal for universal banks. Third point, the relevance and links between this proposal on bank structural reform and the growth and jobs agenda, and that includes, in my view, also the work that the Commission, or the project that the Commission has announced related to the Capital Markets Union. And then very briefly, maybe touch upon the state of play of the negotiations in the Council and the Parliament. Although since Jakob is here, I try not to step onto his turf, and I will let Jakob van Weizsäcker speak about what the Parliament's ideas are, both in terms of process and in terms of substance. Commission has learned that we should not step onto the turf of the Parliament. So quickly going through those 4 points, the rationale for the proposal, it's true that we've done a lot in the last 5 years to address the problems that were highlighted by the financial crisis. Our view is that for the vast majority of banks, there are, I don't know how many banks operating in the EU, 7,000 or 8,000. The reforms that we've adopted are perfectly adequate. They were certainly necessary, and for the vast majority of banks, they address the problems that we have identified. No doubt there are still a few loose ends here and there, and there's still work going even at international level, for example, on TLAC, on resolution, which has not been completed yet. But basically, the framework is there, and that framework is perfectly fine for the vast majority of banks. However, there are a small number of banks, but important banks. We estimate that our proposal will affect about 30 banks. That's based on analysis based on historical data. That number may change, it may become 40, or depending on exactly how things move also in terms of market structure. But for a small number of banks, the reforms that we have put in place do not necessarily address all the risks that we have seen emerging during the crisis, and before the crisis even. If you look at capital, for example, capital is essential. We needed to improve both the quality of capital and the quantity of capital that was available to banks, and that is a great achievement in the context of CRD, CRR. But when we're talking about these very big banks that carry out very significant amount of trading activities, we're talking about activities that are complex, in many cases opaque, and that are very difficult to price. And if you have difficulties pricing risk, then you have difficulties using capital as a tool to address that risk. And we see this, for example, in the very wide dispersion of the way that banks deal with risk-weighted assets, in particular for these trading activities. And that is an illustration of some of the difficulties that we run against. If we look at another very important pillar of the reforms we've put in place, resolution, recovery and resolution plans, again, essential, but I think there's a wide recognition in the regulatory community that there is still a question mark about how this will work or how this could work for the largest and most complex banks that we are talking about in the context of this proposal. This remains untested. There will be all kinds of political considerations also, but also these banks tend to operate across many jurisdictions, and that all makes the resolution process a great deal more complicated. So in order to address those residual risks which attach to these very large, complex banks, small number, but important banks, we consider that bank structure reform is essential. In order to provide an additional constraint on the development of trading activities, which we have seen ballooning over the years that preceded the crisis. This is something that remains an issue in terms of addressing the too big to fail problem. And again, the too big to fail problem, I think, is really the linchpin that we still need to fully address in the context of the follow-up to the crisis, because if we don't address fully the too big to fail problem, really many of the achievements which we have made so far risk being called into question, because a failure of one of these very big banks is inevitably going to have broader consequences and systemic consequences, and that is something we still fully need to address. Second point is the link to universal banks. We are sometimes accused, or people sometimes say, that this proposal is a proposal that targets universal banks, or that is somehow inimical to the universal banking model. That is certainly not the case. We are not targeting universal banks per se. What we are targeting, what the aim of this proposal is to ensure that large, complex banks that engage in significant amount of trading activities do not overstep a limit of a socially acceptable limit of risk. And that is really what we're setting out to do. Again, that is linked intimately to the too big to fail issue. And we want to make sure that supervisors have a tool which is credible in addressing that issue of risk. Now, it is true that this proposal will inevitably have consequences for universal banks, but it doesn't target the universal banking model as such. And I am sure that universal banks will remain part of the European banking scenery even after the implementation of this proposal. Third point, link between what we do and the growth and jobs agenda. Again, this proposal has a number of objectives, and one of the objectives and consequences of this proposal, we hope, is to rebalance the incentives that banks currently face between trading activities and more traditional commercial lending activities or commercial banking activities. And to the extent that we can do that through this proposal, notably through addressing another issue which Rim has mentioned, which is the issue of implicit subsidies, we can actually encourage banks to devote more of their resources to traditional commercial lending activities rather than to engage in speculative trading activities, which we do not think do necessarily always play a socially useful role. And certainly if you look at the evolution of bank balance sheets over the years before the crisis, you have to reach the conclusion that some of these activities were not driven primarily by the need to serve the real economy, given the very large ballooning in this trade in these activities that we have seen. I think the bank structural reform proposal can also complement some of the work we are doing on the Capital Markets Union. Rim mentioned before the point that to the extent that some of the banks affected by this proposal will have to withdraw from certain activities, and that may very well be, to a certain extent, an impact, that activity may need to be picked up by smaller competitors. And indeed, that may very well be a consequence, and I think that would be a perfectly healthy consequence to the extent that it increases competition in the banking market. So I do not think we should fear that. I've heard the concerns about shifting activities to the shadow banking sector. I do not think those fears should be overstated. Certainly, if you look at the impact of our proposal, proprietary trading, we define it purposefully in a narrow way. So the risks that some of those activities, or a great deal of activities, will shift to the shadow banking sector because of our proprietary trading ban, I think is certainly very limited. And for the other trading activities, we do not propose to shift things away from the banking sector. We merely propose to subsidiarize those activities within the banking sector. So they would remain within banking groups, they would remain within the supervision of banking supervisors. So again, the question is not a choice between bank structural reform and growth and jobs. These things are perfectly compatible and they can indeed support each other. Very quickly to finish off, because I think I've probably already bumping against my time limit, the state of play in the Council and the European Parliament. Proposal was out in January. Serious work in the Council did not start until early May, if I remember correctly. We've had a very good discussions both under the Greek presidency and currently under the Italian presidency. That work is ongoing. We've now dealt with most of the major building blocks of the proposal. I think sometimes when the discussions in the Council are characterized in public, I do not always recognize the debate that we have in the Council. There are various views about various issues, about the various building blocks of the proposal in the Council, and we will have to continue working intensively in the near future to bring those views together. On the European Parliament side, I think everybody knows, and again, without stepping onto Jacob's turf, we've heard the first exchange of views in the Econ committee. Rapporteur has clearly announced his intention to bring forward a draft report by the end of this year. So I think the next 6 months after the 1st of January, and indeed the time under the Latvian presidency, I'm very pleased that our colleague from the Latvian presidency is present, will be a very intensive period. I think the first 6 months of next year clearly will be the time when we need to nail down these issues that we have identified both in the Council and we're starting to identify with the Parliament, and to bring together a text so that we can move towards a general approach. That is certainly the ambition of the Commission, and I think you've heard from Commissioner Hill in his hearings that he certainly sees this as an important file that we need to take forward, and I'm sure that he remains fully committed to this file. And that we will continue to bring this file forward in the next 6 months. So that's as much as I wanted to say. I'll leave it there because, again, I think time constraints don't really allow to go into more details, but I'd be very happy to answer any questions at a later stage during the debate. Thank you very much, Rim.